Ever since I first played Witch's Heart in spring of 2020, the game and its characters have held a special place in my heart. For almost 3 years now, it's not only been my favorite RPG Maker game, but my favorite video game in general. Of course, it doesn't have the largest fan base, and although playthroughs can definitely be found, they're a bit sparse. Not to even mention analyses and video essays on the game, which are extremely few and far between. However, as the title suggests, I'll be trying my hand at just that. I was inspired by Overanalyzing Avatar, which is a channel I really enjoy, and similar to him, I'll be taking a more casual approach to my analysis, pointing out things I personally like or personally dislike, random things I've noticed after playing and watching others play the game again and again, etc. One last thing, this might go without saying, but even though I'm covering just the prologue and bad ending in this video, there will be spoilers for the main scenarios, bonus stage, and Sirius's conclusion. This is so that I can point out foreshadowing, parallels, and other stuff like that. Without further ado, let's go. First off, I've seen people trying to compare these Witch's Heart stories in the beginning to our characters. I think this is mostly just because of the fact that Claire's favorite story, the one by Kevin Martinez, has a lot of parallels to Sirius and Dorothy's relationship. In the story, the witch saves a man and takes care of him, and they bond and grow close before ultimately parting ways. Not to mention, the man's design bears a slight resemblance to Sirius. On its own, this is very convincing, and I would agree that these Witch's Heart storybooks are meant to represent our characters in some way. However, this is the only storybook that really fits with anyone. Sure, you could potentially tie the story about the girl getting lost in the woods to Claire being abandoned in the woods as a baby, but there's a lot of things wrong with this comparison. As for the second story, the one about the girl getting rid of her rival in love, you could connect it to Coco's backstory, but that's like a really random connection, right? Anyways, the point is that I disagree with the notion that these storybooks are meant to tie into our characters. I think they're just surface level and meant to introduce the concept of the witch's heart being able to grant wishes. Okay, as for something I've seen that I do agree with. Interestingly, different aspects of Claire's wish are related to the four main demons. Wanting to live in a house made of sweets connects to lime, as the buildings and rooms that she creates are usually comprised of sweets. Wanting to bathe in tea with floating rose petals connects to both Giselle and Rouge respectively, and lastly, wanting to sleep with stuffed animals connects to Charlotte and her love of plushies. Pretty cool. Overall, Claire's character introduction is pretty spot on, and we can instantly see what she's all about. She's happy-go-lucky, maybe even a little absent-minded, and she's definitely just girly like that. Her wish also establishes that she can be sorta naive or childish, but she can also recognize when she's getting a bit too silly. So she's not completely airheaded or straight up dumb or anything. Awesome establishing of her character. If you open the menu after first gaining control of Claire, you can find the nice pebble from the riverside in your inventory, so the pebble that she throws out the window later doesn't come completely out of nowhere. Nice continuity. There's something regarding the prologue that I haven't seen anyone else ever bring up. It's not something big, but I always found it sort of interesting. It has to do with something revealed in the bonus stage though, so I'll bring it up whenever I analyze that game. Ash's first lines of dialogue are likewise great at introducing us to his character. He talks very eccentrically, to the point where even nice old Claire is like, damn, this guy's kinda weird. He comes across as full of energy and incredibly friendly, but some will find his constant smiling and his almost even crazed expression to be unnerving, which is of course perfect. Kinda morbid, but anyone else ever think about how Ash probably tried digging up Dorothy's grave? Because he's here for the witch's heart, so I assume he definitely tried to excavate Dorothy's body to get the heart from her corpse. It just makes sense, right? Of course, we later learned that there's no actual body in the grave, but Ash wouldn't have known that. And yeah, I know he doesn't have a shovel when we see him, but it's not far-fetched to think that this is just one of multiple visits to the mansion for him. I digress though. The unsettling part of the prologue with all the little Grimblies, and the big Grimbly at the end. The splitting head pain that afflicts Claire. There's not much to back this up, but I personally believe this to be the pain of all of her deaths from all the other timelines crashing onto her at the same time. In other words, this weird red zone, or right after she crosses through this zone and enters the mansion, is where each time loop starts from. Initially, I had believed that each time loop started from the scenario select menu, as this made sense from, like, a meta standpoint. But then I realized that the bad ending instantly disputes this theory, so yeah. The monster's key smashing can actually be deciphered. This was always a thing in the original Japanese version of the game, but VG Person didn't catch it initially. However, with the 2.00 release of the game, she corrected the monster's dialogue to also be decipherable by English-speaking players. Essentially, for every capital letter, you replace it with the letter that comes next in the alphabet. This B becomes C, this K becomes L, and so on. Here, the monster saying, "Claire, why are you here?" Anyone anyone else also view this Dorothy portrait as her wearing a backwards cap? Like, I know that's her witch hat, but I can't help but see it as her wearing a back-facing cap like some skater dude. Swag Dorothy real. It's funny to think about how Sirius was just silent in Dorothy's room the whole time that Ash, Willardo, and Claire were breaking and entering. Like, he probably overheard Willardo's gun, and also them shattering the second-floor window. I can only imagine him just being legitimately terrified. This exchange between Ash and Willardo about trespassing. There's a really random parallel between this interaction and another interaction in bonus stage, which I'll bring up then. Moving on, unfortunately, I feel that Willardo's first lines of dialogue are kinda weird, right? I mean, not his very first one, but the several ones after that. He's pretty rude and even kind of snappy, which feels very odd for him. Like, after playing through everything, coming back to the prologue and seeing him say, "Bah, why won't it open? Should I kick the damn thing down?" and "Get lost, shoo, shoo," is just really jarring and doesn't feel representative of how he actually is. I guess it could be argued that Willardo was like, "Fuck it, I'm not ever gonna see any of these people ever again, so I'ma be as rude as I want," and then once it was revealed that they were all stuck in here with each other, he decided to change his tune? It's hard to think that this line of reasoning was intentional though. There's also another argument to be had, and it takes into account what Zazelle says at the start of Sirius's conclusion, that everyone's hearts influence each other with every loop. So you could say that this rude, snappier Willardo was how he was before all the time loops, and that he grew eventually to be softer and more reserved as time went on. And there kinda is evidence to support this. However, I find it to be more likely that this impolite version of Willardo was simply Izzy's initial vision of him. It is the prologue, so if we assume that it was written before all the other scenarios, perhaps his lines were written before Izzy had a good grasp of what they wanted Willardo to be like, which explains his few bits of uncharacteristic dialogue. I love Claire, man. She always just does what needs to be done, no hesitation. Do you think that Ash asked Claire to put the frying pan back because he didn't want her to have something that could be used as a weapon? I mean, yeah, he didn't ask Willardo to put his gun down, but that was Willardo's own weapon that he had brought, so it would have been more unnatural to ask. Anyways, Ash is the crafty type, so I wouldn't put it past him to always want an advantage in potential fights. I really like Charlotte's introduction. You're in a weird, obviously supernatural space, and you come across a mysterious little girl in a cutesy getup, but then she instantly puts you on high alert by knowing who you are and what you're like, even though you have no idea who she is. Not to mention, I think this is one of my favorite CGs in the game. It just looks great, and I love the framing of the bloody scissors around her pupil. Kinda disturbing, which is good for establishing her character. Charlotte's first line. I'm 99% sure she's referring to Zazelle here. As for why she's excited about meeting Claire first, I assume it's because it makes Claire an easier target to kill since she doesn't have Zazelle to warn her about how Charlotte is like, a weirdo. Of course, when Charlotte says, "Those guys are after you, you know," she's referring to Ash and Willardo seeking the witch's heart. I remember when I first played though, I thought she was talking about all the Grimblies roaming the mansion, so I figured I would mention it. It's definitely nice that they prompt you to save before the chase scene. I've seen a few people not realize that a chase is about to ensue, so they just stand there as Charlotte rams into them. In fact, according to this very statistically significant Instagram poll, approximately 1/3 of players didn't even realize that they were supposed to run here. The player's introduction to Noel Levine's character is also great. You can instantly tell that he's more reserved, polite, and honestly just straight up more normal than everyone else you've met so far. It's a nice contrast to all the zaniness that's been encountered so far, and a nice contrast to the higher energy characters, and the edgier Willardo. Kinda an obvious one, but it's cool that Noel is the only human that you don't actually see entering the mansion from the outside. Obviously, besides Sirius, since Bro lives there. It feels sorta insignificant, but also was enough to make me go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I feel our meeting must be fate. I know what you are. Sirius's first appearance and his first few lines are so good at establishing his character that I feel like I've seen 90% of players just instantly give him a posh British accent. Nice. Fun fact, in older versions of Witch's Heart, Ash introduces himself to the others as being 5'8", while his profile in the portrait room describes him as 5'10". However, at some point, the translation was fixed, and he's currently described as 5'9" in both places of the game. I guess it was a typo after all, and he wasn't randomly lying about his age. I always loved the irony in Willardo saying that they're only gonna be here for a second. It's a nice touch that Sirius would pick Noel in particular to take his old room. It makes sense that he'd feel most comfortable letting an old friend reside in it, rather than a complete stranger. Alright, so a woman used to live in this room, according to Sirius. I initially wanted to believe that this was actually also Claire's room from when she was a child. After all, her diary is in here, and it can't be Dorothy's room because we know that her room was the one next to the dining hall. However, what really throws me off is that Ash says that the clothing in the drawers look like they'd be worn by women aged 20 to 30. Thus, I'm not really sure what to make of this. This could potentially have been Fiona's room before she moved out then. As for why Sirius would know that Fiona used to sleep in here, it's not improbable that Dorothy would mention it to him at some point. This is admittedly just speculation though, but also I'm not sure who else it could be. It's so random that the world of Witch's Heart is just upside down Europe, it makes me laugh. Mimir. Okay, so the cryptic red text. I interpreted it as Ash threatening Sirius to tell him everything he knows, and of course Sirius is really freaked out and confused, proclaiming that he doesn't know anything. At this, Ash probably thinks he's lying, or even if he does believe that Sirius is telling the truth, he can't leave Sirius alive after showing him his true colors, so Ash starts attacking him. This is why Sirius goes, "Eek, stop it, what are you thinking?" Which is kinda funny, but I digress. I know that Ash is the one that ultimately ends up getting killed, but I'm pretty certain that Sirius is the one begging to be spared here. After all, this lines up with this scene so far, and I also just can't imagine Ash going, "Please don't kill me." Alright, so what events led to this encounter? We know that the fight took place in Claire's room where Ash was sleeping for the night. It couldn't have taken place anywhere else, such as Sirius's room, because Sirius had to grab the axe off the wall in the spur of the moment and protect himself with it. So, why did Sirius go to Claire's room? The answer is actually quickly found in the other route, where you choose to not switch rooms with Ash. Sirius comes by the room to pick up the diary from her bookcase, as requested by Noelle. There are two possibilities from here. Either Ash doesn't know what Sirius is taking, or Ash has already read its contents. I don't think the first scenario happened though, because even if Ash is nosy enough to pester Sirius about what's in his hand, I don't think that Sirius refusing to tell him would spur him into attack mode. Maybe he'd whine and beg a little, but he'd ultimately let it be, just as how he acted when Sirius refused to let him into the back area of his room. Also, if you check the bookcase after Ash dies, the diary is still there. You'd think that the diary would at least be on the floor or missing or something if Ash started attacking Sirius while he was taking it from the room. Thus, I think that Ash had already read, or at least skimmed over the diary's contents by the time that Sirius entered Claire's room. With this knowledge, he'd know that Sirius was close with the witch Dorothy when he was a child, and that he was also acquainted with Claire by hiding it. I think that this revelation would be enough to drive Ash to start forcibly pushing Sirius for information about Dorothy and the witch's heart. After all, he's someone who, according to the diary, grew up under the witch. Thus, when Sirius conveniently appeared before him, he decided to threaten information out of him, which resulted in Sirius panicking and killing Ash in self-defense. That's how I believe things went down. Of course, the him that line refers to here is Noelle. And the "for my sake" thing is referring to her wish of finding someone who can understand her, or in this case, traumatizing someone enough so that they can understand her. Willardo's pretty kind here. Claire's starting to blame herself for Ash dying, but Willardo steps in to tell her to not think about it, and to also be on her guard since it's dangerous. See, this is already a lot different from the shoo Willardo from earlier. Here, Sirius says that Noelle tricked him. If our interpretation of Sirius and Ash's encounter is correct, then this makes sense. From Sirius's point of view, Noelle told him to go to Claire's room to retrieve the diary. However, all that awaited him there was Ash, who threatened him for information and then attempted to murder him. Poor Sirius. In extension, Sirius might be thinking that even Claire was in on everything as well. After all, it's because Ash was in Claire's room that Sirius came across him in the first place. So that could be why he says that she's the most to blame. Of course, there's also the meta aspect where he's telling the player that they fucked up. Overall thoughts and rambling time. The prologue is great, and the bad ending is alright. Of course, players who get the bad ending first haven't even started touching the real meat and bone of the story yet. Despite the fact that I usually recommend my friends to get the bad ending first before starting the actual scenarios, I also find myself worrying that the bad ending will turn them away from the game. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's just because of the fact that the deaths feel pretty random, and I'm scared that new players will think it's representative of how Witch's Heart will be, I guess. But I'm sure that I should probably just trust in my friends knowing what bad endings are. Anyways, that's all for the prologue and bad ending. I am planning on analyzing all the scenarios, bonus stage, and the conclusions as they come out, so stay tuned if you're a Witch's Heart fan. But yeah, this was my first time ever making any sort of analysis or video like this, so it means a lot that you've watched this far. Thank you so much. I hope to see you again in the future. Peace, love, Witch's Heart.